You're rating it like 1 to 5 stars.
It's not Avatar: The Last Airbender.
So, we watched the movie I Am Not a Serial Killer after reading the book. This is my friend Madison.
Hello.
And what did you think of the movie?
I have strong opinions.
Let's start out with things we did like about the movie, because I think that'll be easy to knock out. And then we can talk about things we didn't like. So one thing that I loved about this movie was sense of setting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it captured the small town in the Midwest perfectly. Like, the icy, snowy scenes, everyone is like saying hi to everyone. It was beautiful.
Yeah, and like everyone knowing people by name and stuff like that, kind of, they nailed the setting, so that made it feel like really close to home, kind of.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that's kind of what they're going for, is, you know, you never know who could be like this sort of creepy serial killer person, and it's something that could just be right outside your doorstep. I have other things I liked too. I made sure I wrote them down.
Yes,
Let's
continue, please.
Because I didn't have a super long list. Like the cafeteria scene with the bully.
Yeah, let's talk about that one.
That was freaking awesome. There was a couple things that I think they missed, but I did love that you could actually tell exactly what was going on in his head without hearing it. Yeah. Like the way he scraped the fork on the bottom of the table. Like, well, you could tell that he was like grabbing onto it. Like, I would really very much like to stab this person with this fork. You know? Like, just that like slow scrape just conveyed all of that perfectly, and that was really cool.
But my problem definitely with this movie is more on the editing side. Because there were so many times when we would get this big moment that was super emotional in the book. Like, for example, one of John's loves is working in the embalming room and helping out his family's business at this funeral home. But then, at one point, his mom throws him out and is like, I don't think this is good for you, you're too obsessed with death, like, no. And that is such an emotional moment for John. And then later, his mom says, you know, I can see that this really made you upset, you can come back and help.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's also an emotional moment for him, because he's getting back his love. But in the movie, after she throws him out, and also after she invites him back, we get, like, no reactions from John. There were so many moments like that in the movie where I feel like it ended the scene too soon, that we didn't get a character's reaction to this emotional thing. It just happened and then was done. And, like, another one of those moments where I feel like you had to know some more context in order to understand it was, like, when he was first meeting with his therapist. Mm-hmm. Right? Because in the movie, his first meeting, and I guess kind of all of his meetings with his therapist, happened, like, outside while they're bird watching. Yeah. And honestly, when the scene first opened up, and he said, hey, to his therapist, I assumed he was just saying hi to a random person outside. Yeah. Like, I didn't even realize they were there together.
I thought it was going to be one of those lake scenes where he just, like, kind of chills by the lake with all the weird people.
Exactly, because there's scenes in the book where he just chills by the lake with weird people and occasionally says hi to them. So I was like, oh, that's a weird person by the lake. And then he started, like, confessing all of his inner feelings and what just happened?
To be honest, like, I feel like that was the biggest failure that the movie had, was that you've got this story that's happening entirely inside of this guy's head, basically, right? That's, like, that's where the tension is, that's where the interest is what's going on in his head. Well, it's like, oh man, it looks like he's kind of slipping a little bit, you know, those little tiny details that you have to pick up as you're inside of his head. And I think the only way that they could convey that in the movie without just doing a voiceover, you know, like just like the awkward, like, oh, we're showing the scene and here's my voice in my head telling you what I'm thinking. Without that awkwardness, that like narrator crutch, I think the only way they could have effectively done that is to have that use of the therapist. Yeah. They've got the entire setup to just like, here, let me pour out all of my soul and my emotions and like, or lack thereof, and talk about what's going on in his head. And they didn't talk about what's going on in his head. I was really disappointed with that.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of the book was this emotional core of you are scared for John. Not that something will happen to him, but that he will do something because he has all of these, like, serial killer urges, you know, that he wants to keep held in, and that's the purpose of his rules, that he, like, doesn't stalk people, he tries not to think bad thoughts about people, but then over the course of the book, he starts breaking more and more of his rules as he hunts down this demon serial killer guy. Yeah. And in the movie, he did mention his rules, but you never got a scene where he was like, wait, no, I can't talk to her because I'm, like, too close to stalking her. So then you didn't care that he was breaking the rules. You didn't even know what all of his rules were.
Like, we knew that he had rules because he mentions them in the movie. I have a problem with how that happens, because it's in the very first scene with the therapist before we've even figured out that he's talking to the therapist. Like, he says, hey, and then the next words out of his mouth are like, I've been breaking some of my rules. Like, if we think about it like a 3-act structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've got like the beginning, and then it kind of like the tension starts going up and stuff, and the character starts kind of growing a little bit, and then something terrible happens, and then like they kind of figure it out, and like all this time the tension is rising, and then it falls. We're already like kind of on top of one of those tension hills, and we don't even know it. So they can't raise the tension too much from there, because we've already gotten to the point where he's broken his rules and he doesn't care anymore.
John is like too good at being a serial killer, right? Like, this is one of his special skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is being a serial killer. But he doesn't want to be a serial killer. But he has to use his special skill set in order to hunt down the demon. I had pretty high confidence that John was going to catch the demon in the end.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't
not
a
just
big
because it's
question.
a YA book, but
Yeah,
still.
not just because it's like a happy ending to the book, but just because he's so good at like tracking people down, stalking them, you know, setting traps for them, figuring out their weak points.
Yeah.
It's one of his special skills. So my big worry for him wasn't, is he going to succeed? It was, will he stop after this?
Mm-hmm.
Or will he continue and start hunting down people because he's gotten a taste for it? And that's also John's internal worry. But then in the movie, he's not as competent.
Absolutely.
Like, in the book, he has a plan of, like, notes he wants to send, responses he is expecting to get, why he wants to send them, what that means. Like, he has goals for everything he does. And he's enjoying that goal, and, you know... But then in the movie, I never got the sense that anything he did had, like, a goal. Mm-hmm. It was just like, I'm so freaked out, what's happening? I'm gonna follow him to figure out what he does next.
And I think that follows up on your point of, like, the action-reaction thing. Like, we see him give a note once, and then we never see any change from that, you know?
Just, there's this entire layer that's gone, like, with Brooke. Because in the book, he kind of, like, starts fixating on her and stalking her, and that's, like, a sign of him slipping into serial killer tendencies. But then in the movie, he's watching her a little bit, and there's, like, no mention of the rules or, like, whatever. But then most of the movie is her approaching him and him ignoring her. So... And you don't even know why he's ignoring her. It's just like he's too focused on hunting down the demon. Yeah. It's like, oh, there's a girl flirting with me? Whatever. But then in the book, this is like so dangerous that she's approaching him because he's already stalking her. The thing that I really was hoping for in this movie was that they would expand the conflict between John and his mom. Yeah. Because in the book, the main conflict is like his mom does not understand him. But she wants to. But she isn't going about it in a good way. You know, she's just kind of like nitpicky and kind of, you know, pressuring him to share. And do you want to take the lead on talking about a stabbing scene?
No, a stabbing, because I know I have thoughts about a stabbing scene.
So you bring that up and take the lead on that.
Well, let me tell you about a stabbing scene since you brought it up for me. Okay. So there's this one point in the book that I think actually I would say is the emotional low point, like the belly of the beast of the hero's journey here. That he picks up a knife and threatens his mom. You know, there's red flags up until that point, but that's the point that he realizes I have stepped over the line and, like, I don't know if I can go back from this. And so in the book, it leads up with this, like, she says, like, tell me how you feel. Well, I know that you don't feel things. Tell me how you're thinking about it. And that's the moment that he has that outburst. Is that, like, yes, I have feelings, I have no connections. I don't understand why you guys feel the way you do. I don't feel connected to you. And he freaks out about it. He's like, I feel things, and he picks up the knife. And that's the first moment that it really talks about him having an emotional connection with the person, and it's so creepy. Because it's like, he's holding this knife, and he's fixating on, like, how she's focusing on him holding it, and that fear, and that, like, connection, and it feels really good for him to have that connection finally with someone in any way that he can get it. He just has felt so isolated this whole time. And in the movie, it's completely different. He shouts at her and says, I don't feel anything. And it's almost the exact opposite impression, and it completely destroys that concept of isolation. Because now the problem's not, I can't connect with people. It's like, oh, well, I have no feelings, I'm a robot.
The thing that bothered me most about the scene in the movie was that they missed the aftermath a little bit. Because I remember when I was reading the book, after he threatens his mom, and then he realizes, like, wait a minute, I'm pulling a knife on my mom. Yeah. And then he, like, has to think back, and he's like, my life is falling apart. Like, the moment when he says, I'm sorry, and puts down the knife and decides to, like, turn things around, that's the emotional low point of the book, because he's also deciding to start growing back up again. But then in the movie, he just puts down the knife and walks out. Like...
Yeah, and that could have been, like, especially with that apology, I think that could have been one of the moments that they emphasized that isolation. Because, you know, with that whole connection breaking, but also with him, like, actually choosing to physically walk out, separate himself, and shut the door. He's, like, putting himself back in his shell. He's like, okay, if I can't have connections in a good way, then maybe I shouldn't try to make them, kind of.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
Actually, let's talk about that phrase that he uses, because he talks about himself there being a monster.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we get that. I think we've talked about it a little bit with the rules, but I don't think we've really gotten into it quite so much. Because I feel like a big theme of this story is, like, what does it mean to be a monster? Is this demon a monster? Like, because he's killing people, but he's doing it because he feels love, because he feels like a connection, right? And it's painful for him. He doesn't want to do it. So is he a monster? Are you a monster if you don't feel connections with people? What does it mean to be a monster? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be alive?
All questions asked by this movie, or asked by
not
the book.
asked by the movie.
But then the movie doesn't really touch on any of that. So let's talk about that ending.
Oh.
He attacks the demon's wife, and the demon knows it was him now, and then, like, you know, Mr. Crowley, the demon, is now angry at him, and then, like, threatening him, and then there's, like, you know, the second thing where he's hidden a corpse, and then the demon's like, where's the corpse? And then he kidnaps his mom. That felt ridiculous to me.
It was the worst. And actually, we were talking, and Chloe decided that this movie was okay, which I have opinions about. But when I was like, okay, so Chloe, why was it okay? She said the ending was okay. So tell me, what was okay about this ending? Give me your defense. I want to hear.
In some ways, the ending was okay because it did stretch out the tension a little bit more. Because once you knew that the monster knew it was him, tension. But I think thematically it worked less good.
Mm-hmm.
I just think if I hadn't read the book, I would have enjoyed this movie more because I wouldn't have had the expectations of how it was supposed to go. It definitely breaks down for me, especially that scene where Mr. Crowley and John are, like, sitting in the chapel, and then Mr. Crowley is like, I know you hurt my wife and that you're hunting me down and I'm gonna kill you. You don't know what I've done. In that moment, in the movie, they made Mr. Crowley into, like, total evil. But then in the book, he's still kind of relatable and not necessarily redeemable.
Yeah, but at least sympathetic.
Yeah, he's like a sympathetic villain. And then I feel like in the movie, just throws that out. And that also takes away the bond that they could have had of John and Mr. Crowley, of John sees another person who's bad at being good, like himself, that he connects to them. And that's one of the things I actually want to talk about too. In the book, there's a powerful scene where he's disappointed on Christmas because his father didn't show up, didn't provide a very good present, just kind of showed that he didn't care. So then John is emotionally crushed.
Yeah.
And what does he do? He goes out to a payphone and calls Mr. Crowley, the demon who he has been hunting. It was such a stupid decision. You were thinking, John, stop being such a stupid teenage boy. But John wasn't doing it out of logic. He was doing it feeling, because he felt more connected to Mr. Crowley, the monster, in that moment than anyone else. And he needed to talk to someone because he was in such an emotional low. But then in the movie, I feel like they never showed that emotional connection. So then when he calls him, it's just like, well, that was stupid.
And I think kind of also with that connection, I think he feels a connection in general to serial killer. I think that's part of why he can understand Mr. Crowley, and part of why he understands him, or part of why he fails to understand him so drastically. Through that, like, lack of concern for life, he feels like he sees something of himself in that. Okay, so, you talked about the tension in the ending. I completely disagree. Part of the reason that the story works so well is because there's a feeling of distance. It goes back to that isolation. Everything happening boom, 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 like one after another. The urgency that is in the ending is like the climax, you know? It's the climax of the story. Everything has to happen right now, and it has to happen perfectly, or he loses and the demon gets away with, like, all the body parts that he needs, and he just lives out the rest of his life and nothing changes besides, you know, some murders and people that die. So everything has to work immediately a certain way. And that's really good three-act structure, right? We've got, like, the building, the rising tension. He's realized that he's at the emotional low. He's kind of started taking a couple steps back from the edge of the cliff there, and then he falls off the edge of the cliff. And the tension is as high as it possibly can be because he almost kills the demon's wife. And that moment that he, like, has that confrontation with her, you actually believe that this guy could become a serial killer.
And then, you know, out of emotional reflex, he calls the therapist, and the therapist is like, whoa, slow down, I'm coming to find you.
Yeah.
But then in the movie, he hits her once, and then is like, oh no, and then immediately calls the therapist. And there isn't that reaction moment of him freaking out, of him going too far, of him realizing he's about to go too far. And so it's just all flat.
Okay, so building forward from that point of, like, I have fallen off the edge of the cliff, I need help. And so he calls the therapist, right? Everything from that moment cannot stop. Because if you stop there, you lose every bit of tension that you've built up.
Which was disappointing. That the movie, like, it was so close to being good, I think they didn't realize that the gem of this story was the tension of John versus his own terrible killer instincts. But instead they made it John versus the demon.
I feel like just kind of going back to the urgency, and it's not killing the demon that matters. It's the fact that it was urgent, the fact that he chose to value emotional connection even though he couldn't feel it, over his own life and saving his own skin. So that's why I thought the ending was absolutely terrible in the movie.
Your points are so wonderful that I can't argue with any of them.
No, go ahead and argue. It's all right.
They could have made it work in the movie, drawing out the climax into several different scenes, but logically it doesn't make sense. Like, why is John doing any of this? Why is the monster doing any of this? Why does the mom go along with the plan to kill her neighbor? But logically, like, it just falls apart so quickly, and that also robs the emotional punch from the end.
Yeah.
In the book, in the end, the demon says to him, remember me. Because that's, like, a thing that they can do with each other. Because, you know, they had that connection talking about fire, talking about remembering. Like, even though they are literally mortal enemies trying to kill each other, they can still do the service of remembering each other. Because that's, like, part of being alive, part of being human is remembering and mourning over loss. But then in the movie, he says, like, take care of my wife for me? Why would he be saying that to the two people who are literally in the process of murdering him?
Like not even, like...
Logically, it doesn't make any sense, and also it doesn't, like, resonate with anything else that's happened in the movie.
They kind of destroyed all the emotional payoff in this story, didn't they? So it was a terrible movie all around. But hey, at least you thought it was okay.
Yeah.
And I probably made it worse by complaining about things the whole time.
This is wonderful, because now I've been enriched.
Okay. I don't know if making it hard for people to enjoy things is an enriching thing, really. And I'm sorry about that.
It's like the job of all the YouTubers.